out, I guess. Trust me, it surprised me more than it surprised you guys. Okay. I'd like to call a special meeting and board workshop of the Board of Trustees, the Goose Creek Consolidated Independent School District, to order. Okay, Madam Secretary, do we have a quorum?
Yes.
And was the meeting properly posted?
Yes.
All right. We're going to skip item number 2, the public hearing. We'll move directly to item number 3, citizens participation. We have some traffic on I-10, which is making 225 backed up, that's where our attorney's at to help us with the public hearing. So we're going to do that, and then when she gets here, we will circle back around. Before we begin, though, we will remind. Sorry, Dr. Duarte, you're already walking up there. We will remember. When we started last meeting, before each meeting, we will read our mission, vision, and core values. So remind everyone that our mission is developing the whole child. Goose Creek CISD develops and enhances each learner's intellectual, social, and emotional well-being, and facilitated by a highly qualified team committed to growth, community, collaboration, innovation, success, and determination. Our vision is we empower every student with the knowledge and skills they need to succeed in a global community. And our core values, as spelled at GCCISD vertically, graduate every child, children first in a safe and nurturing educational environment, collaborative community and parental involvement, integrity, respect, humility, and transparency, service before self, diversity respected. All right, we'll go to item 3, citizens participation. This is the time that the board will hear any public concerns or public comments from those who have signed up to address the board. Before hearing such matters, I remind each speaker that you are limited in your presentation to 5 minutes and that you should not identify any teachers, administrators, staff, or students by name in addressing your concerns or comments. Pursuant to state law and board policy BE legal, the board cannot consider or take action on your concerns at this meeting unless it pertains to an item on the posted agenda for this meeting. Any deliberation or decision on an item that is not posted for consideration at this meeting shall be limited to a proposal to place this subject on the agenda of a future meeting. And since this is a special meeting, remind everyone, by law, the meeting is videotaped and will be available on our district website. So I wouldn't do anything that you wouldn't want the whole world to see. With that being said, our first speaker is Miss Libby Zeglin. Ms. Zeglin, you'll have 5 minutes. Ms. Woods is our official timekeeper. She'll let you know when you have 1 minute remaining. The time is now yours.
Good evening, school board members, administration, and guests. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Libby Zeglin, and I have lived in this district for over 20 years. I am here tonight to speak about the rezoning of the district for our high school students. The current school year has been a troublesome one for my family and over 375 additional families in my neighborhood. My husband, son, and I live in Pinehurst. We had 6 feet of water in our home. We have been living in a small travel trailer in our driveway for 7 months. We have at least 1.5 more months of this before we are able to move back into our home. I would like to encourage you to not have the zone for Pinehurst changed to a different high school. Our neighborhood has been through so much. The continuity of staying at Sterling would be very beneficial to our neighborhood. There are several other neighborhoods in Baytown that were very hard hit by Hurricane Harvey. I would ask that you would please think of these students in these neighborhoods as well. The loss of possessions and the displacement for months has caused much anxiety for many students. Please don't give them any more anxiety related to school. School has actually been the most normal part of my son's life for the past 7 months. My son is currently a freshman at Sterling. I would also encourage you to allow the sophomores next year to be grandfathered, as well as the juniors and seniors. Ninth grade parents have spent a significant amount of money for their students to become involved in activities that require specific items related to each high school. There's club shirts, dance costumes, cheer uniforms and camps, band uniforms, athletic clothing and letter jackets, and many others. With money being tight, I would like to see the 9th graders this year to be able to continue at their current high school so that the parents would not have to reinvest in these items that are specifically related to school or color. Another reason for grandfathering 10th graders next year would be to limit the number of transitions that a student would have to make. Is in an article in Contemporary School Psychology by Cyril Goldstein and 2 others, the studies showed that a transition from school to school increases the student's stress. This transition also leads to lower grades and increased anxiety. This even happens when students have stable friendship groups that transition with them. This was one of several reasons that most parents were unhappy with the mega school concept. The additional transition is not good for the students. My third reason for grandfathering 10th graders next year would be to have continuity in their relationships. This is an emotional response, but as a parent, I'm emotional in relation to my student. I'm not just talking about his peer relationships. I am more concerned with my son's relationship with his counselor, his grade level principal, coaches, and teachers in their pathways of choice. The loss of these relationships would be detrimental to my student and all 10th grade students next year. I know that rezoning must happen. It's not ever popular, but my fear is that this is all happening at a pace that is very hurried and could be prone to mistakes and consequences if not well thought out and planned. My highest hope would be for you to delay the rezoning for another year and really get it right. It's almost April. Students have already filled out their schedules for the next school year, and I know at Sterling, cheerleading tryouts for 8th graders who will be incoming freshmen have already happened. Money has already been paid by those families for camps and uniforms to the tune of about $500. Other extracurricular tryouts like these are sure to follow.
You have 1 minute remaining.
I think that there are several out-of-the-box ideas that could reduce some of the inequalities that we are seeing in our high schools right now. I encourage you to take some time to plan this rezoning endeavor. Please don't rush to make decisions that will be harmful to our students. Thank you so much for your time and attention. I hope that you will consider the students and their need for continuity when you make your decisions about rezoning.
All right, thank you, Ms. Zuglin. Our next speaker is Marianne De La Rosa.
Good evening. My name is Marianne De La Rosa. I'm a parent of 2 Goose Creek ISD students, a sophomore and a 3rd grader, and also an alumnus who is a freshman in college. Our sophomore participates in the orchestra program. I'm here this evening to ask for your support and serious consideration of amending the changes scheduled to be implemented to the Fine Arts Orchestra program next year. My 2 oldest students have participated in the orchestra program since they entered middle school. My oldest child, who started playing the viola when he entered the program, has become an accomplished musician. Among his many school accomplishments and awards was he was a 3-time All-State participant and earned first chair during his junior year. Upon graduating from Sterling last year, my son was honored by receiving a full scholarship from the University of North Texas School of Music, and he is a member of the prestigious quartet program. His degree plans are dual major of performance and education. His first semester in college culminated with him being honored on the president's list. My son, like many other children in our community, had the first experience with music, performance, and competition as part of the fine arts program offered in the district. The structure of the program allowed my son to pursue his passion for music while coexisting with his other program studies and within the campus community. With the new plans of consolidating high school campus programs and the development path of students who wish to participate, they will be impacted significantly. In the case of my youngest son, who will be entering middle school in 2 years, the decision to participate in the orchestra program will be very difficult. We would very much like him to be in the program. However, the prospect of my son having to change high school assignments and leaving his established friends and support network will weigh heavy on our decision. 3 years ago, myself and other orchestra parents worked diligently to encourage the administration and the school board to hire 1 new full-time music director, this to allow each campus to have a dedicated position. The purpose was to lay the groundwork for the orchestra program to begin thriving as our argument had been that the program had been understaffed and was being starved of needed resources to make it successful. After numerous meetings with the administration and presentations to the school board, the board approved the additional position. Within 10 weeks of that approval, a new music director was hired for Sterling. We were then notified that the CBGA music director left for another job in another district. The vacated position was not posted or filled. The end result was that due to attrition, the number of music directors had not increased by one as the board approved. The commitment to try to revive the orchestra program was abandoned, and the problem of retaining high school students had persisted or has persisted. Over the last 2 years, the music directors in the middle schools have been working diligently to encourage participation and retaining students. The results demonstrates their hard work. The number of students participating and remaining in the program has increased. Many of these students are on the verge of emerging from the middle schools into high school. Over the next 2 to 3 years, with the work being put forth in the middle schools, expectations are that the participation numbers in the high school will increase. However, the success will be impacted by the current plans to consolidate the program because many students will need to make the decision of changing their high school assignments. Mr. Hawkins sent each of the board members a packet of information supporting the addition of one music director and maintaining the current programs in each campus. The arguments are compelling and support our request that the Fine Arts Orchestra program remain in the local campus communities. On behalf of my family and the families in our community, I request that the board direct the administration to reverse their decision to consolidate the Fine Arts program for the orchestra and fulfill the board's decision of 2015 by hiring a new music director. Thank you for your time this evening, and most importantly, thank you for your consideration of our request.
Thank you, Ms. De La Rosa. Our next speaker is Mr. Evan Kerr. And our last one. That's Mr. Kerr's son.
Good evening. My name is Evan Kerr, and I apologize. I'll be reading this on my phone. I didn't have much time to assemble it. I'll be speaking about the destruction of the orchestra program tonight, and I'm not going to be speaking to the logistical or economic detriments of it, but as a member of a group of people that you should care about, as a student of Robert E. Lee High School. I'd like to start off by dedicating my first comment to this district's fine arts director, who's not here today, because it's been made known to me that he has sent notes to multiple orchestra directors threatening to fire them if they speak about this with their students. And it disturbs me then for him to have the audacity to tell them to act professionally is rather ironic in this situation. Now, there have been many people who have wanted to blame the school board, and quite frankly, I blame everyone in front of me today, but that isn't exactly a well-grounded blame, as some would say the school board suffers from naivete, but they really suffer from ignorance, because they almost deliberately don't know anything about this situation. But I think as more people speak, the district learns more, meaning that any vocalization about anyone with a public position is positive. I haven't any idea why the orchestra has been chosen as the punching bag program in this district, but it's hard to blame our low numbers on us when we are provided with such small amounts of funds and promotion. Few people, including our fine arts director, will probably tell you that if you do not want to move for orchestra to GCM, you can join band or choir, and this is an incredibly ignorant belief, as the two programs are very different and require different skills. I don't see anyone moving band to GCM or choir to GCM. You still have a budget for golf, a highly unpopular program. Isn't this district supposed to be developing the whole child? I feel that it's rather unfair to take away many students' most productive elective just because you don't promote it enough. Anyway, thank you for your time. That's all I have to say.
All right, that concludes our public citizen participation. We're going to go back to item agenda number 2, the public hearing.
I'd like to welcome Ms. Sarah Leon up. She'll be presenting to us this evening the application for a limitation on appraised value of property for school district maintenance and operations taxes submitted by JSW Steel USA Inc. Texas Taxpayer ID 32033679039, Texas Comptroller's Chapter 313, application number 1208. Welcome, Ms. Leon. We appreciate you being here this evening. Sorry you got held up in traffic coming across Houston. I understand you've been traveling from Austin since about lunchtime today, so sorry that you encountered that, but welcome to Goose Creek. Thank you for being here this evening.
So nice to be on this side of Houston. Thank you for your patience. This evening, the board has for consideration an application for a value limitation agreement with JSW Steel and okay. Closer to me?
Yes.
Better now? Excellent. The board has before it this evening an application for a value limitation agreement from JSW Steel. The applicant is here present today and if prepared to say hello to the board if you have questions of them. You have several items on your agenda. One of them is to enter findings on under the 313 of the property tax code, and then to approve an agreement. And so I'd like to go with the board through the findings, and so you know what you'll be acting on. If members of the board have seen findings in the past, these are a little bit different. The comptroller has changed the requirements for all documents filed with their office, that once they are posted on the internet, they have to be ADA compliant. And so some of the documents that typically we would file in the past, for example, another copy of the application, I've not killed more trees than we needed to because we can't post those. They are already posted, and so that the findings look a little bit different than they have in the past. But effectively what we're going through is the process that has taken place here. The board accepted an application from JSW Steel last fall. We submitted that to the comptroller's office, and the comptroller performed an economic analysis. And as part of that analysis, the comptroller determined that over a 25-year period, this project will return to the district an amount equal to or greater than the M&O tax relief that they're going to receive under this agreement. So it's a 10-year value limitation where the maintenance and operations taxes will be reduced for this project, but over a 25-year period, that will all come back to the district according to the comptroller's model. The comptroller has also determined that the value limitation agreement is a determining factor in this project moving to this area, so that it could move to another state or another country in the absence of a value limitation agreement. We had also prepared for the board a school finance study. Region 12 Education Service Center actually did the calculations. That's at attachment B in the packet. And the summary of that is that this project will be very beneficial to the school district over the course of the agreement. The total revenue that we'll bring to Goose Creek from revenue protection payments, pilot payments, payments in lieu of taxation, and new maintenance and operations taxes to the district comes to about $24 million, just shy of $24 million. The company will get a tax incentive of $4.9 million over a 10-year period. So certainly the company does receive a value, but this district also receives a significant value for this company moving into the district. We've proposed, if you turn to the last page of the economic impact study, you'll see that we have negotiated with the company a 40% benefit. So at any time during the agreement, we did not receive, how do I say that? At any time during the agreement, if the school district's benefit exceeds 40% of the tax benefit to the company. We have put a cap on that so that because your value limitation amount is so high, they're going to pay maintenance and operations taxes on $100 million. That just made it a little bit more equitable so that the company could receive some benefit under the agreement. And again, in comparison to the benefit to the school district, I think it's a favorable swap. The Exhibit C to the findings is the actual economic development agreement. It is an agreement that provides some of the terms are mandated by the comptroller, some of the terms are negotiated. The significant terms for the district are that any loss of M&O revenue that the district has receives as a consequence of this agreement will be paid back by the company. So if you, in the first year when it comes under limitation, you will lose state revenue. And under this agreement, the company agrees to hold the district harmless so that all that lost maintenance and operations revenue is repaid. In subsequent years, the school funding formulas catch up, and so there is no additional loss of revenue. So for the school district's perspective, although the company is receiving a tax benefit, we are not losing any maintenance and operations revenue to the school district. We are also able to tax the project at the full value for interest and sinking fund purposes. So that will help with paying off bonded indebtedness. There are, I don't think, any other unusual terms to the value limitation agreement other than that 40% net tax benefit cap so that the school district gets at 40% of the net tax benefit, we don't receive any additional supplemental payment revenue or payments in lieu of taxation. That's a lot of information. Are there any questions about this project or about the agreement or about the process?
Are there any questions? This is a public hearing, so are there any questions from the public on the 313 agreement?
I would just say you took a very complex matter and put it in simple terms, but I do think it's open to the public. If you have any questions about this, Ms. Leon is here for that very reason, to answer any questions about the tax abatement through this 313 agreement with JSW Steel.
Any board members have any questions? All right, well, that concludes our public hearing. We'll take us to action item number 4. Consideration of conflict of interest acknowledgement. My understanding is each board member individually needs to say that they do not have a conflict with this.
Each board member should initial the conflict of interest acknowledgement. That will allow us to enter it into the minutes of this meeting. And so 10 years from now, when the state auditor asks who was on the board and did they have a conflict, we'll have a record of that in the meeting.
So we don't need a verbal response?
You don't need a verbal response. I would just pass it along. It's not an action item, but each board member is acknowledging that they're familiar with the policy and they do not have a conflict.
Who has the conflict of interest?
No.
Oh, okay.
So let's pass that. I'll come on down. Okay. We'll go to B. Consideration of possible action to enter findings under the Texas Economic Development Act on the application for a limitation on appraised value of property for school district maintenance and operation taxes. Parentheses, Texas Comptroller, Chapter 313, file number 1208, in parentheses, submitted by JSW Steel USA, Inc.
And administration does recommend board approval of action item 4B at this time.
Do we have a motion to accept for a motion for action item number B?
So moved.
Second.
All right, we have a motion by Mr. Laredo. We have a second by Mr. Ben Poppy. Do we have any discussion? All in favor, raise the right hand. Any opposed? All right, motion passes 7-0. No absence. Yeah. Item number C, next item, consideration of possible action to approve an agreement under the Texas Economic Development Act for limitation on appraised value property of for school district maintenance and operations taxes with JSW Steel USA, Inc.
Administration once again recommends board approval of action item 4C.
We have a motion for item 4C. We have a motion by Mr. Ricky Flynn. Do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
We have a second by Ms. Jessica Woods. Any discussion? All in favor, raise a hand. Any opposed? Motion passes 7-0. All right, item D, we will go to closed meeting. Then once we adjourn from the meeting, we will begin our board workshop on the rezoning. We thank the other committee members for being here. Ask us to give us a few more minutes. We're almost there. We can start our committee meeting in a momentarily. We'll now recess into closed session pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code Section 551.071, 072, 073, 074, 075, 076, 082, 083, 084, 087. No action will be taken while the board is in closed meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion. Have a second? Second. All in favor, raise your hand. Okay, unanimous. We will now open. We now move to our board workshop. I guess I'll just talk as I walk. To discuss school rezoning. We thank you for the community members, and we apologize. We were a little bit later back there than we had anticipated. We appreciate your patience. Board members, grab your name badges or whatever.
I believe the board members scatter out and allow about 2 seats in between you so that the citizens can come in and fill in the gaps in between the 2 seats.
All right. Thank everybody for coming. Again, we apologize. We spent a little more time in closed session than we had originally planned.
Mr. Poppy, I'd like to introduce our guest tonight, if you don't mind. Dr. Stacy Pera is here with us this evening from PASA. PASA is a demographer, a company that studies the demographics of a city and reports to us as a board, collective body, and be able to make decisions. You've been invited here tonight by a board member, and we're thankful that you're here, and we hope to have a healthy conversation to determine the next steps in this process. With that,
May I interject before we
Oh, absolutely.
before we do that? Number one, Stacy's going to go through her presentations. We asked her to develop presentations with absolutely no feedback from the board except for the parameters of the 1900 to 2100 at 3 traditional high schools. And then we gave her the grandfathering piece that we had talked about last time. But we did not, she knows nothing about neighborhoods other than what she studied on her own. We had not given her anything that we looked at before. I believe we asked her for 4 options. I believe she has 3, and then one is a 4th hybrid kind of thing. I looked at them before the meeting began. It's the first time I saw them. One thing I want to ask is, this is going to be difficult, is as we sit here and we determine and look at the options that have been developed, and then we'll break it down and get more detailed. And it's going to be difficult. I'm going to ask it is, we need to look at it logistically and not emotionally, and it's going to be hard. It's hard not to get emotional when you have a child who's maybe moving from one school to another. And so, not to say not to take emotions into it, but try to take a step back and try to look at it from an analytical point first. There will be emotions, we understand, but I appreciate everybody taking that time and taking that view. And so if we look at the opportunity that we have here before us in this committee to look at rezoning our schools. This is what the community asked us to do. We had 3 public forums on the mega piece, or the community high school proposal. That was clearly not the direction our community wanted to go. But they were very clear at all 3 public forums, which were attended by over 100 people each one, that they want us to rezone and keep traditional schools. And so that's why we're here, and we thank you for coming. With that, I'll turn it over to you, Ms. Stacy.
Thank you. I am happy to be here tonight. Oh, is this enough of a microphone? Can you hear me? Okay. Our company did a demographic study for the school district a few months ago and did an exhaustive study that you may have seen the binders. Okay, it's about 300 pages that went into all of the factors that went into how many students we project to be living in each neighborhood over each year for the next 10 years. I won't go into any of that tonight. Just know that all of that is used to be summarized into these numbers that you will see tonight. Again, I received a request from the board to develop options for rezoning the 3 traditional high schools. The criteria that the board gave me was to put between 1,900 and 2,100 students in each of the 3 traditional high schools. Because this is what I do as a professional, I added some other criteria that I recommend be considered in this process. And that is considering the feeders between junior schools and high schools. And so as I was going through and developing these options, I tried to not create any small splinters, is what we call them. That's when one small neighborhood gets moved to a different high school from everybody else in their junior school. So that would, my definition of a splinter is if 20%, less than 20% of a junior school is zoned to a high school and the other 80% are zoned elsewhere, I consider that a splinter. And I recommend that at least an 80-20 split between high schools from a given junior school. The best case scenario would be 100% feeder if an entire junior school goes to one high school. That's not possible with 5 junior schools and 3 high schools, of course. But that leads us to the next consideration, and that is if the bond passes and if junior school 6 is built in a few years, then there will be the possibility of having 6 junior schools feeding perfectly to 3 high schools. I don't know that that will happen, but that would be an ideal to work towards. And so as I was developing these options, it was important that I not put the district in a situation where you get backed into a corner, where if you drew these high school zones like this, and then you do try to have perfect feeders when the 6th junior school is built, if that wouldn't work, then let's not do it now. If there's no way it can work, then let's try something else at this point. I can't promise what will happen with the junior school zones in several years, but I needed to make sure that I wasn't setting you up for failure with these options. Okay. I also tried to minimize change. Of course, nobody likes change, and there. If you can achieve your other goals and move fewer students, then let's move as few students as possible. And then there's been a lot of talk everywhere. In every district, there's talk about trying to socioeconomically balance the schools. And I spent a great deal of time looking at SES balance with the current zones and with these zones. And I'll give you a spoiler alert that because of the locations of the schools, the geographic locations of the schools, compared to the geographic locations of the student population, it's really hard to affect the socioeconomic balance between these schools without doing some really ugly pocket zoning. And I don't professionally recommend that. Pocket zoning means to take one neighborhood way over here and zone it across the district just for the purpose of SES balance. I do not recommend that. I don't think anybody does. I don't think anybody would really propose that. So these options that I'm going to show you tonight took SES balance into consideration, but not nearly as strongly as the other criteria, because you can't really make that much difference and still meet the other criteria. Having students go to school, not have to drive past 2 schools to get to the 3rd school, etc. Okay? So let's start with the current high school zones. The numbers that you see on the right represent the number of students that are projected to attend these schools next year and in 5 years and in 10 years. Now, these the numbers for the 3 traditional schools. We have pulled out all of the students that are attending the non-traditional programs. And the assumption is that the Stewart Career Tech program will expand because it only has 9th graders now, and so over the years it will pull more students, and our assumption is that those students will be pulled from the 3 traditional schools in the same proportions that the 9th graders were pulled this year, right? And it's, I don't remember offhand the numbers, but it's relatively balanced, equivalent numbers coming from each of the 3 schools. So, again, the goal was to have each of the 3 traditional high schools with between 1,900 and 2,100 students. Now, before I get too far into this, I want to remind you that I don't live here. I don't have children in this district. I don't have a dog in this fight. And so I have developed these options based purely on objective data. That is my professional responsibility, to provide you with objective information. It's then the committee's responsibility to tweak these options with all of the subjective issues that I don't know about, and that it's not my job. It's your job as community members and parents, okay? So I don't have any information about this neighborhood has to go to that school, or what the community prefers, or any of that, because I don't live here. I'm just looking at the numbers, and I'm trying to meet the criteria we just discussed: minimize change, junior school feeders, etc. Okay, so let's move on. In order to talk about junior school feeders, you need to understand what the current situation is. So the red, blue, and maroon, that's the best facsimile of maroon that we can do on our computer, sorry. Even though I'm from College Station and we're all Aggies, that's the best maroon we can get. So, oh, absolutely not. It's not allowed. Okay, so the yellow lines are the current junior school zones, and of course the red, blue, and maroon are the current high school zones. Now, in the bottom right table, you see that Baytown is split, Baytown Junior is split between all 3 high schools, and only 13% of Baytown students are go on to Sterling. That's this blue area here. This plus this represents the 31% going to Memorial, and 56% goes to Lee, okay? Again, also, Horseman is split 77% goes to Lee, and then this bit of blue here goes to Sterling, and Gentry is split 61% is in red going to GCM, and this part is 39% going to Sterling. That's the current situation. And so the first option that my first approach was to try to clean up some of these junior schools. If the goal is to move students into Lee, right, Lee is at about 1,500 students, and our goal was 1,900 to 21. So the goal is to move some students into Lee. So where should we start? Well, my argument is starting by making as close to cleaning up some of the feeder patterns if we can. And so that brings us to option 1. The black line now is the current high school line, and the colors are the proposed zoning option 1. So in this case, I'm just going to go ahead and put the junior schools up there because it shows you how this used to be blue, and now Horseman is entirely feeding into Robert E. Lee. Baytown is split. This is cleaned up a little bit. Remember, there were some jagged zoning along through there currently. Baytown is now split only 2 ways. 80% goes to Lee and 20% goes to Memorial. And Gentry is a 35-65 split. So this is a somewhat cleaner, improved feeder pattern. And that was the sort of the thinking in developing this option. The second option, zoning option 2, tries to minimize the change for moving as few students as possible. And so in this case, this boundary between Lee and Sterling that was moved in option 1 is no longer moved. So if we move on to the junior schools, you can see that Horseman still has the same split. Baytown is cleaned up somewhat. It is only split between 2 schools, and Gentry is split between 2 as well, between Memorial and Sterling. But these splits are, they meet my 80-20 threshold, and so it's, in my opinion, it's better than the split that we currently have with Baytown Junior being split 3 ways. All of these, well, option 2 doesn't, I argue that it almost meets the criteria. It is almost 1900 and a little bit over 2100 at Sterling, but it was close enough that I felt like it was a viable option to show you. And finally, zoning option 3 also tries to tries to optimize the zoning, the feeder patterns, just in a different way. So this is similar down between Sterling and Lee. And the question is how do you pull students up to Memorial? And in this case, this pulls the east side, simply because if you're going to be pulling students up to Memorial, you can pull them from this part of the district, or you can pull them from this part of the district. And this was just a way to show a secondary method of achieving that. All of these 3 options that I have shown you could allow for a perfect feeder to be set up with the construction of Junior School 6. They do not back you into a corner. I can't guarantee that you, as a community or the board, will approve of a way to cut these high schools in half when you open Junior School 6. But it's possible, it's feasible, it could work. So I feel like I've fulfilled that responsibility to not back you into a corner in that aspect. Now, I told you I took this approach of trying to come up with various options that meet these criteria. I tried and tried and tried to find a 4th option that meets these criteria, and basically everything is just a variation on one of these themes that I felt like showing you any 4th option, it would be minor difference compared to what you've seen, and this can be vetted out in this community process. And so I submit to you that option 4 might be a consideration to just postpone this whole decision until Junior School 6 can be built, and then all of the zoning happens at the same time. Now, part of the reason that you hire me as a consultant is to benefit from my experience in other school districts. And so I can tell you that I recognize that Goose Creek is not everywhere else, and every school district has different community philosophies, etc. However, yes. I beg your pardon. Yes. It's very similar to option 1. So we're back to
Cleaner than what we currently have.
it is, yes. There are 1, 2, 3 perfect feeders. Cedar Bayou, Horseman, and Highlands are all perfect feeders, just like in option 1. Baytown is split between 2 high schools instead of 3, and Gentry is still split between 2 high schools, but both of those splits are 80-20 or 70-30. Options 1 and 3 are very similar in this aspect.
Can I ask a question? When you're
Yes.
doing this is not moving the junior high boundaries at all.
That's correct.
I'm just curious as to what's we're looking at.
That's right. These yellow lines are the current junior high boundaries.
So is there a way, so you didn't, I'm sorry, I apologize. So there's no, you didn't go through any kind of analysis of, because that would obviously be traumatic, of moving any of the junior high boundaries to affect the feeder patterns into the schools. That would be too much redistricting. Is that?
That's correct. That was not my charge.
Okay.
That would be down in junior 6.
Sure, I understand. Yeah, it makes sense.
So we wanted to make it, she was asked, she looked at, was make it as close to possible, so when 6 comes in, you just minor adjustments, and slide it in there, and it's not a complete overhaul.
So my thoughts on option 4 would be, as I said, pass a bond election, open junior school 6, do all of the zoning at once. There are some other thoughts about if you're worried about the overcrowding at the traditional schools, then there are other ways that might be handled, like expansions of the capacity, of the academies and other non-traditional programs to pull students out of the 3 traditional schools if that's an issue. Again, my experience with other school districts, I've helped dozens, if not hundreds, of school districts do zoning, and I can tell you that at the high school level, they are always finished by Christmas. Every zoning effort is finished by Christmas, if not a year in advance. So doing this at the last minute is highly unusual. It's not to say that it can't be done, but it's highly unusual. And finally, my thoughts from my experience with other schools is that when one school is more disadvantaged than the other, or other two, the administration typically deals with that in other ways, like reducing the numbers at that school and having special programs and so forth. And so in other areas, that might not be the negative stereotype that you see here by having fewer students at Lee. Maybe that's, in other districts, they consider that an ideal to have fewer students and focus on lower student-teacher ratios, etc. I feel like it's my responsibility to tell you that is my experience from other districts, but it may be that the process has moved too far. You've already made your decision. I just wanted to let that be known. But at this point, I can answer any questions about the 3 zoning options that are on the table. I can also plug in my laptop, and if you have questions about what would happen if we moved this over there, we can get into that, although that may be getting a bit into the weeds.
I've got a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. One more thing. I failed to mention that you have these maps in a handout. I apologize if there are not enough handouts for everyone. I didn't realize there would be a full committee tonight. But we also have a transparency with the junior school boundaries, the current boundaries, as an overlay. And so you can use that to see where the current junior school lines fall compared to these options. Question?
Yes. Actually, 2 questions. The first question is, in the very beginning, did you say that you were still using the previous demographic data as far as the data that we saw during the town? No.
That was in-house data.
That was in-house data. Okay.
Their data was provided us about a month ago.
Gotcha.
For the bond, maybe 2 months ago.
The second question, this may be a question for the table more than you specifically. It was my understanding that the 2 main goals from the rezoning was, number 1, to get the occupancy levels at the campuses to the percentages that the school district feels like is good stewardship of the buildings, to make sure that we've got a certain percentage of capacity in those. But that also the second thing was that each school would then, as closely as possible, reflect the demographic makeup of the city. And
Well, the school district, not the city.
well, the school district, sure. But we're not seeing any of that data yet.
Well, the sheet, and I'm not trying to correct you, Mr. Connor, but I think it was socioeconomic data, not demographic.
I'm sorry, yes,
Socioeconomic. She
socioeconomic.
started her presentation off by saying she doesn't recommend we do that.
Right.
Well, she said didn't recommend we do the pocket zone, just that that's the full
Just
driver.
right.
She said we'll do our best to do a rear zone. It may not be all. Instead of being this far apart, maybe that far apart.
So then is the scope of the project moving? If those are the two focuses.
What do you mean moving though?
Well, it seems like those, at least from the very beginning, from the mega school concept and all of this, was to try to equalize the socioeconomic makeup of each school.
No, the first step was to equalize the number of enrollments at each three campuses.
Sure.
Secondary cause was to try to get the SES population as close to as possible.
Right.
The driver was three campuses, 1,900, 2,100.
Right. Right. But that was the second.
That was the second.
Yes.
But the first was the 19 and 21, knowing the only way, and she mentioned it, the only way you could have had it if SES be your full driver was the pocket zone. And I can't speak for the board as a whole, but I don't think any of the board members want to really go into new pocket zone.
So just to touch back
Now,
on,
that's not her recommendation either.
no, but just touch back on previous rezoning efforts and looking back when we had 12, 13 slides, there was an effort to look at SES, and there's a variable of about 25 points from north to south. And when we were looking at that, the closest it got was about 17% gap. So with the most extreme moving of the lines, you only gained about 7 or 8 points in closing that socioeconomic gap. So it would be more radical even than the most radical line moving. So that's when she referenced pocket zoning, which is not favorable. But the looking at the line adjustments has been done, and it's just we're not able to close that gap.
I think also the thing that we were looking at is, and the reason that we kind of want to equalize the numbers is just because of the amount of growth happening on the north side of town. And in Robert E. Lee, I mean, quite frankly, the south side is not experiencing the same amount of growth north side is, and we're having a little bit of space issues so that we can have, for many reasons, the most obvious is because seats available on the campuses, but also to give the schools opportunity to be able to have healthy programs academically and athletically. So, that those numbers exist, that they can become productive for the students.
So for the benefit of the entire committee, what he's referencing is the two high schools, Central and North, are at about a 95% capacity, while Robert E. Lee is at 65% capacity. So there's the variable that we're talking about with board goal number 3, finding some equity, and the directive given to PASA was get them all at 2,100. Yes, sir.
So if the SES was kind of difficult to use for that rezoning, is the main factor in making these new zones just distance to the high school from those neighborhoods? For moving those lines?
So Dr. Parrott didn't look at socioeconomic because once looking at it and realizing it required drastic pocket zones to make a huge difference, they couldn't get much past, like I said, 7%.
So what was the biggest factor or driving factor in moving those lines?
Try to get them close to the junior school.
Right, the distances to the schools.
The junior school boundaries.
Okay.
So that in an ideal world, which we don't ever live in, but an ideal where bond passes, junior school 6 is built.
Right.
We have, in a perfectly aligned world, you have 3 elementaries, 2 junior highs, would feed to each junior high. Then you'd have 6 junior highs, so 2 junior highs each would build to the same high school. So
That's a perfect world.
That's a perfect world.
Right.
And that's not going to be done at this committee tonight or this next month or two. But right now we're focused on high school and getting junior highs closer. And then when 6 comes on, then we would actually finish it. And then after that, we could look at elementary. We're talking 2, 3.
But I think you're making a valid point. I think part of that is that some of the options that our staff did present that in given the data that we were given, that was one of the things that we were considering is the fact that in some of the scenarios, some of the kids were passing, and sometimes they were closer to 2 high schools, and they were going to the one that was furthest and trying to figure this out.
Just north of Sturman. Yeah. We just pushed everybody south. You had students there driving past Sturman. Yeah. So that's why you took that into consideration, tried to make it as logistical or logical.
Even in this perfect world, though, if we are going to a true feeder pattern, you're still going to have students that live closer to one high school but go to a different junior high that will wind up at the other high school. There is no perfect world unless we were living in squares and, perfectly gridded out all over the community. So there are transportation issues that we have to look at, but we definitely are not trying to pocket money from one side all the way across to the other side. Which is why we're sticking with a lot of socioeconomic numbers that seem to be, if you look at 1, 2, and 3, and even our current, the numbers basically stay the same, even moving just the lines a little bit like they've done.
If the bond passes, when would be the anticipated open date of junior high 6?
A year after we break the dirt.
We talking 2019, 2020 school year?
Well, the goal would be that.
Okay.
So the bond passes May 5th in a perfect world with good weather. We break ground June 15th. Our goal would be to get into it the following year.
So 2020.
But
Not gonna happen. You're not going to split it up at that point. I mean, but I mean,
mother of all transitions.
I'm just thinking because as the consultant says, I'm wondering if, to be honest with you, this zoning issue right now shouldn't just be null and void for the rest of this year to even anticipate for next year, being that we are so far behind.
The bond proposal is already volatile enough. And
I think the community was clear and they said rezone traditional high school.
sure.
And they didn't say wait 2 years. I mean, that's the thing was, that was the board's philosophy was, we were told, we're doing what we've been asked to do. Mega was not on the table. If you wait and try to do high school and 6 junior schools and then do your only all at one time, I think Stacy has done a very terrific job of trying to make the high schools, our goal was, this is one of our board goals, is balance the high schools out. And at the same time, the boundaries are very similar to the junior school boundaries. So when 6 does come, assuming the bond passes, if the bond doesn't pass, you got to add another year at best to that schedule.
That's a big assumption, isn't it?
I think right now it's a big assumption. If it passes, it's a big assumption if it doesn't pass.
Right.
I mean, I think you're 50-50 on a good day. I mean, I don't know. A lot can change.
So could I share a little historical perspective? Because everyone at the table may not know that the rezoning didn't just start. This conversation didn't just start. It was, like I said, about a dozen renderings were given, and that's when we were looking at SES. It was done by our transportation department, who actually has the numbers of where the children live in which house. We started it with that, and the administration was presenting to the board at that point in time. And what I would say, just for reference point, with that, you have an SES factor at the northern high school of 45%. You have an SES factor in the central at 55%, and you have an SES factor in the southern high school at 65%. So, and those are, I'm rounding off. It could be 24 points instead of exactly 20 variables. But the moving that we did, one radical move was to go up the east side and bring that all south. I mean, that's just to tell you, we looked at 12 or 13 options trying to bring in the SES factor ourselves, and that's when we relented. And we said, you know what, we need to hire someone to do this for us. And we have professionals here with us tonight, and what I heard for the first time tonight was it may not be, unless moving the lines helps you with that SES factor, it may not need to be your focal point. Because the only way to get to that radical of a change is by doing the pockets, which is not recommended in any school district necessarily.
I think in addition to that, I think the public is, for lack of a better word, they're already nervous. I think if we postpone this again, people will feel that we're not fulfilling our commitment to the community. I'm sorry, but I know we've been kicking this can for 2 years as a board. We've waited 2 years. We first brought this out 2 years ago, recommended to wait. The problems that are appearing now in concerning grandfathering and concerning programs, those problems are going to be there next year and the year after that, because they were there when we rezoned last, when we opened GCM. They were there. I just don't feel comfortable, and I don't feel like we would be doing proper service to our kids if we just keep kicking, because right now the schools are in situations that are unfortunate. I'll tell you, as a father of a kid who goes to high school at Lee, he participates in programs that don't make and it's frustrating. Take that part of my personal part away. If we don't do something to give some relief to Goose Creek Memorial and to Sterling and do something to boost our numbers at Lee, there's going to be other programs that fall by the wayside that are opportunities for our children where they're at disadvantages against other school districts. I'll be perfectly honest with you, because the thing, and I know people get upset when we talk about athletics, but I have a program that I run at my school, and I'm not the only one, because there's two programs that run over 100 kids, which is the same program I run at my school, where 100 kids are, a coach is responsible for 100 kids to pass their classes. That's academic. And when you look at things like that, and you don't give people, the kids, a fighting chance to be in bands that are productive and are strong, to be in programs that are productive and strong, to be in UIL competitions that are productive and strong, because just for the lack of numbers, or they're driving an hour down the road to go participate in programs because we don't have our schools together, it's a disservice to our kids. And I can understand the emotions, I can understand all these different factors that are being played out now, but those factors are going to be there next year, I assure you.
One thing to bring up, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just have a question. It seems to me, and I have just a genuine question about data, because what strikes me is the professional advice that you're getting is the maps, right, which are, their professional advice. They also gave another piece of professional advice is they'd actually recommend delay. I mean, that is the professional advice. Yeah, and I mean,
that wasn't a recommendation.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, I'm just saying, it was, she said that was one of the issues. The question I've got, I don't have an opinion on that, I just have a question. My question is, there are a number of things, I got stuck in the same traffic somebody else got stuck in coming over here, so I was a little late, but one of the speeches that I heard as I walked in was talking about numerous things that kids have kind of already done for next year. And I don't, with the numbers that are moving, and I'm just, yeah, there are ninth graders, think that they've already, like schedules have been started to be built out, and other things at all grade levels. Yeah.
And high schools haven't developed yet, but the juniors, kids have selected as juniors.
Right. And I don't know all the parameters, right? I mean, there could be a lot of things like, fine arts and extracurricular activities, all that. I'm just asking, has anybody looked to see kind of what the impact is going to be because if you have a situation where you have a little more lead time for the zoning, right? I mean, you're ahead of all those things when you announce it, so you don't have things that have already kind of moved and you have to kind of pull the ripcord and go back. And I'm just curious as to whether anybody's done any analysis of how much stuff is kind of in motion right now that's going to be disrupted, and how disruptive is that going to be, kind of deal. I don't know if anybody's looked at that.
I think the only disruption again is back to the ninth grader.
Okay.
Because the 10th and 11th, or 10th and 11th now, will have the opportunity to grandfather or voluntarily go to their new camps if they so desire, which won't be very many. The ninth grade is the one we had the public comment on, and that's the one that the board will probably need to have another conversation once that request has been made. But
Sure.
that's something
I think that's what they'd like. I think the board, I'm not speaking for them, they'd like to hear from you tonight. That's part of the reason.
Typically, the high school master schedule isn't even finalized until August. So right now, it's just, here's the request.
When this was voted on to rezone, and they went out and gave the public forums, and the board went out and talked to the parents about what they wanted to do, they were given plenty of warning that this was going to happen. Well, and if I'm not mistaken, students that are trying out or signing up or planning their schedules for next year, that transfers. You make a cheerleader on one campus and you have to go to another school in Goose Creek, it's in policy that you maintain your position. Well, yeah.
Well, not the same uniform.
Yeah, not the same uniform, but typically there will be someone that
There is
needs
an
your
accommodation.
uniform.
There is an accommodation.
There's ways that we have on campuses that we would be able to help, and there's people on each campus that would help those kids if it came down to it, like since the money was already spent, that would step up on some of those and help them out in different situations. I mean, it wouldn't be able to help them with everything all the way through, but they would stand up and help them if they would transition. They've done it before when they rezoned in the district.
Right.
You know, so.
And I remember, and I apologize for saying it's a recommendation. I know it wasn't. I know the word that triggered my mind. Just it was unusual, right? It was an unusual process, and so that's why I called it. I probably said it's a recommendation. Again, my question was just more about data. So if that's what it is, that's fine. I just was curious as to what the analysis was.
I will give you an opinion, and it's based on history, not on data from today. But at this point today, the only thing that has happened for next year is the election of cheerleaders at the high schools. Junior high hasn't elected yet. All that, it's kind of like a ripple effect. The high school cheerleaders are picked the day before spring break. Then the drill teams have 2 weeks, and then they pick theirs. And that's about it. Band, it's chairs. Okay? So it's not like you're trying out for it. Those are the only two, are the cheerleaders and the drill teams that students have to try out to move up. Okay? So if you're looking at numbers, I did have some conversations with people. GCM does not have the complement of 16 varsity next year. Sterling reached their complement of 16 varsity only because they allowed the 8th graders to be cheerleaders next year. And Robert E. Lee did not reach its complement of 16. So right now you have less than 48 children that could be, and that's 48 out of this entire geographic. Of that 48, I would guess maybe no more than 5 would be affected by this at this point right now.
Yeah, I just didn't know the data. I mean, I'm curious because I'm not as close to
But
the
as Ms. Wood said, in years past, when rezonings have gone in, if you had a position at this campus, if you were a JV cheerleader, you were a JV cheerleader there. If you were a star reserve at that campus and you moved to Lee, you would be a celebrity reserve, whatever they call it. They don't call them reserves at Lee, but whatever. That secondary level, they would have that position there.
There's enough positions right now, because you're saying there's not full squads, so if a child like that.
Well, there's positions open, yes.
Yeah, there is lots of positions.
And there's no reason that for a year or two you couldn't have 17 instead of 16. But the guidelines call for no more than 16 under the current. But there was not enough participation in any of the tryouts that all schools fill their 16 varsity.
I can just tell you, I know by talking to the students, and I do work at one of the other, I work at one of the alternative campuses. So I get kids from every high school. And when you talk to them, it does affect our kids. Those kids that come from GCM and Sterling, they're talking about how they're late to class because they can't make it through the halls. And they're overwhelmed in classes, and they're overwhelmed by the other students. And we've got students on our campus that are there because they have deep anxiety issues and they need a smaller classroom size. And because of the things, and I realize that a lot of students can have that, but they're getting that because they're overwhelmed on such a large campus. And those are the campuses that we get most of our students from. We're in the feeder pattern of GCM. 90% of our students come from GCM, and those kids are totally overwhelmed because there's so many students and they're busting at the seams, and those kids are talking about how they are busting at the seams. They need the relief.
Well, and I think another reason why, and you brought this up earlier, and we talked about, do we need to hold off a year, wait to see if the 6th junior high gets built? But we keep pushing this off, and the problems will only get worse. It will not be any different. We will have 7th, 9th graders coming in next year if we're trying to rezone for the next school year that are going to be affected, and those are going to be the parents who are upset about the changes that might be coming teachers and the counselors that they've made relationships with in order to graduate from the campus that they're currently on. If we wait another year before we start the process, we're going to be in a position where we have to say, cut, period. This is your new high school, no matter what grade you're in. Pick up your stuff and go, and take your seat in your new campus. Because if we keep pushing this, and we'll be at a bursting point, and we'll be in a situation where, it's do or die. We make the hard decisions, and I'm sorry that you're the class that got affected by it. Somebody's going to be affected by it.
Here's I guess the thing that I heard was, I guess the two things I guess would be different are, more lead time. Obviously you'd have more lead time if you did later, and you'd have a new junior high. One of the things that, and I know I said this, I think before, but one of the things that I would hope, I think would alleviate some of the shortness of this, is I know the board has talked about grandfathering 10th and 11th graders. And full confession, I've got a 9th grader. I can't, my eyes are so bad, I don't know where my house was in any of those maps. So I don't know. So I apologize. I brought my reading glasses, not my seeing glasses. But I think one of the things that would help, regardless of how that works out, is thinking about grandfathering current 9th graders too, because you've got kids who are going to be ripped out of a current social network and put into a completely different network. And you're doing it at the end of their year where there's no time to adjust to that. They're going to be leaving school before they even know if they're going to be back to that school. My daughter's in PALS. Her PAL moved on her in the middle of the year, and she came home squalling because it was that kind of traumatic deal. She missed that relationship. And so, you got kids who are going to say goodbye to teachers and may never see them again, And so, to me, we talked about change in the mega school and not having these transitions. This is like a mega harsh transition because you're taking kids. It's not everybody moved together from 9th to 10th grade. You're talking about.
Which you would have thought under some of the conversations with mega school that we were doing that.
Well,
we're like, no, you're all going together.
Right, it's still a transition, and I talked about that. The research still shows that, but it's saying the side, you're clearly right that is not the same degree of transition that this would be. I mean, this is going to be taking kids out of a current situation. So for me, if we're going to move forward with redistricting, okay, fine. I might, if it were me, I might say, hey, slow down, let's do it. But if the board has decided to do that, one of the things I would ask you to think about is whether you might alleviate some of the sharp break here and probably a heavy chunk of community feedback by letting the kids who are in a school right now stay there and let them move through it. Because the incremental, I know you want to get it done, but you're going to get it done, and you're talking about a fourth of the current student population. So if you're moving, say you're moving 200 kids, we're talking about 50 kids for 1 year. Yeah, that's what you're talking about. And you buy a lot less trauma. That's just a lot of goodwill. Yeah, a ton of goodwill.
That's the same rule we've already said, transportation provided for 1 year.
Yeah. Or I mean, look, I would even be okay. I mean, there's parents who feel strongly about this. There's parents that don't. I mean, you might say, I mean, this is for you guys to decide because I don't know the data you guys have. Y'all might look at it and say, look, if you feel that strongly about it, you got to get your kid there. And if you can't get your kid there, then you got to go to the regular deal and just say we're not going to spend the money to bus kids. Do that, and then it'll be less than 50 because you're going to have some kids who go.
Like I said, that's one.
Right. One possibility.
Out in the public that.
Sure. Yeah. And like I said,
what we find, we offer for a year.
Hey Pete, turn on your mic. Thank you.
He's gonna go Darth Vader on that.
Well, for the record, I just want to make sure everybody knows that Mr. Benoit, in case anybody listens later, that said no transportation.
Typically, what we find is if we provide transportation for a year,
right,
a lot of students will stay. And the moment that transportation is taken away after that year, I don't know if it's half or 40% or 70%. A lot of them will go back, or those that really want to stay will find a way.
Right.
They will find a friend who lives close to them. They will find a way.
Right.
So I just, like I said, I want to throw it out there that transportation would probably still, under the regular plan, be the
just, just so we're clear, Brent Benoit said it was for you guys to decide. So that's
Now, I do have one question though about the demographic data. Is all of this based on current demographics or projected growth demographics?
Yes. Again, are you talking socioeconomics? Shay, are you talking socioeconomics? Because demographics is different from
I'm
social.
talking about the whole demographics.
Because I don't think anywhere here do we have demographics broken down, do we?
No, but there's
Well, we have
obviously
socioeconomics.
The number of students projected.
number of students projected. The projected growth.
It's the growth numbers that were used for the bond development, my understanding.
Okay.
What we used, was provided by PSA.
You were at the board meeting where PASA did their demographics or no?
No, I couldn't make that one.
Well, I know we looked at a lot of maps.
A lot of red, a lot of blues, and a lot of.
You make all my graphics.
I love it.
I have
But
this
yeah.
on here.
I think
Yeah,
in
get
workshop format, we should go around the table and
Yeah.
let people speak their mind on what they think about where we're at with the process.
Still in my car.
I think everyone should introduce themselves too, because I don't know.
That's a great
everyone
deal.
around
Let's
the
start
table.
right here.
No, okay, start over there. I'll be last. I'm always last in the WM.
I'm Heather Henches. I'm a teacher in the district. What else do you want me to say? Okay.
You're not going to introduce yourself? Everybody knows you.
If you don't know me, don't call.
My name is Brent Benoit. I'm a lawyer in Brooklyn, Houston.
Which mic do you want? He'll pick it up, just talk.
I'm Steve Wallace. Al Richard, I actually answered a call I should have answered.
I was calling his wife and he answered the phone.
Yeah, next time it's honey, it's Al. I graduated from Lee in '79, two boys that graduated from Sterling, so Al thought I would have kind of a view from both sides of the aisle.
Grew up in South Baytown.
I grew up on Washington Street. I'm Vince Davis. I'm a project controls manager for Zachary out at ExxonMobil. Live in Tanglewood off 146 and I have 3 kids that range from elementary to junior high, eventually high school. So I got a surprise phone call one day, so I volunteered for voluntold.
I've known Vince since he was a 4th grader at Bowie Elementary School. When I was his assistant principal.
So
I
when you
never
call
saw that board on you, did I? I didn't have to.
No, didn't have to. So, you know, when your old principal calls, what do? You know?
Exactly.
So, class of '98 Sterling.
Brandon Capetillo. Jessica Woods is my board member, and recently ran into her, and you know, she kind of cornered me, so I said I would help out her with rezoning. Corporate quality manager for Air Liquide.
My name is Suhey Alvarez. Agustino Redo's board member that invited me. I have 3 kids. They're still in elementary age, but you know, sooner or later, they're going to be in this mess too. I graduated from Lee 2002, so I'm a little familiar with the area.
The gentleman that was here was Esteban Guajardo. He also has a child that's in the district.
My name is Alfred Eastman. I'm a regional operations manager for an environmental company. I'm also the vice president of the Homeowners Association for Springfield. And I have a child at Highlands, one at Stewart Career Tech, and one at GC.
I invited Alfred.
My name is Derek Duke. I'm a vice president of an oil manufacturer. I also sit on the board at Shell Federal Credit Union as well. I've got one kid that's still in the school feeder system and one that went through already and is currently enrolled at Southern Methodist University. And this is my wife.
Yes, I'm Chris Duke. We've been in Baytown about 14 years, but my mother grew up here, so I spent a lot of summers here with my grandmother. So we've, like he said, we have the 2 boys, and I have been working for Harris County Department of Education for about 18 years in human resources. I'm a manager, and I think just to add on, and nobody's kind of said anything, but I think this whole process that we've been going through, and I think a couple of times you said if the board decides to rezone, and I think that was never, it's not the board, the community decided to rezone. So I think that's what we need to focus on and get that done for the community as soon as possible.
Hi, I'm Dee Lerma. I teach at Goose Creek Memorial. I was asked by Ricky to represent our neighborhood on this committee. I was born and raised here in Baytown. Graduated in 1984 from Lee High School. I don't have any kids, but my vested interest is representing the high school teachers.
Shay Cotter, grew up in this community, graduated from Lee in '91, own a real estate company in town, Origin Realty, also sit on the Houston Association of Realtors Board of Directors, and have 3 kids, 2 high school and 1 junior high.
Okay, I'm Samantha Goose. I also grew up in Baytown. Here my whole entire life. I also graduated from Lee in '87, and you were my geometry teacher. And I found out, you know, that his wife has also taught one of my children before, and I found out that he was very young at the time. Because I was like, how in the world? You know, in high school you think everybody's old, and they're not. So anyway, yeah. He was very young. Anyway, Jessica was for a long time. She asked me because I do have one that's in junior high. I do have one that's in high school that is at GCM, and it is busting at the seams. So she asked if I would give my input, and I feel like I should. Isn't that hard? Yeah, she twisted. She's like, oh, please. And I said, yeah, okay, yeah, I will. Because I will be having another one coming up. It's going to GCM, and I can see what you're talking about because there's a lot of kids there, and they just have, I mean, mine's a social butterfly all over the place, but the thing is that I can see where there are some kids that may have issues because the classes are large.
So her daughter's friends with your daughter?
In between.
Okay.
She has a daughter.
Nope, they're both younger.
Yeah. I have one that's old.
But the butterfly part.
Oh, yeah. No, I have one that's coming up. I have a future 8th grader, and then I have one that's going to be a senior next year. That's it.
So my son is 18, so that's
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Ms. Woods, did you want to tell everyone
Well, none
about
of the other board members did, so I guess not.
That's why we didn't.
Oh, and for the record, Rashard
We joke
was
quite
my
well.
elementary principal.
Me and her go
This
round and round.
was my idea to have this workshop like this with all of you guys because I wanted as many women here to help me tonight.
Wow.
You're welcome.
Thank you. No offense, Brendan. I still brought you.
Well, on behalf of the board and administration, we are thankful that you're all here. You can hear there's a sense of urgency here, and we'd like to move forward as quickly as possible. Ms. Poppy, I'm going to turn it back to you, but I think there's a desire maybe to have another meeting in the very near future and have some time to soak this in, what PASE has presented to us this evening, soak it in, come back with a preferred model and edits and whatever else we need, and then hopefully a decision can be made in the very near future. Mr. Poppy, you have a timeline in mind?
I have a timeline in mind, but what I wanted to ask was, is there a way we could email this to the committee members? Okay, or make copies tonight? I mean, no any of you make copies now, we can get them to them before they leave, or we can just get everybody's email address.
Email them the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard for us to make a decision if we can't see it.
Right.
Just that's part of the
Dart wherever it lands, okay? No, Noemi, do you want to get some copies made? Can you do that?
Well, and is there some way that maybe we can put some numbers to
The only,
yeah. I know there's numbers on these second pages, but if we're going to consider doing maybe grandfathering in the 9th graders in addition with the stipulation that they provide their own transportation or that we'll do it for a year, I think those are still some things that we can discuss because maybe if we say you can go as a 9th grader, but we're not going to give you transportation,
that's why I said 1 year. It would make sense because you're already busting. Or none for all. I got you.
Okay.
One thing.
I think that would be a whole lot easier for us to talk about if we knew how many children that was actually going
So
to
let me just walk you through this. I mean, we'll get these. Noemi's going to make copies of this. What you will not have is you won't have the transparency copy of the junior high schedule, of the junior high boundaries, which.
It is available online.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
junior high boundaries.
And if you want, we can make some of these more and give them to you at the next meeting.
I think they're drawn in black on these maps, right?
They are.
Yes.
They are farther on down?
No,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
That's the current.
No.
Oh, those are the ones.
Yeah, the black or the
Yeah.
current.
This is the current.
Oh, the current high school zones.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The
Okay.
current is on
See,
this.
I knew I'd get confused. I need
So-
a legend.
I got you. So here's kind of the thing. We'll get copies made for you guys, for the committee, okay?
I have a question.
All right?
Okay, when you are saying that you're gonna grandfather in the 10th and 11th, that would be next year's 10th. and
Next year's
11th.
10th and 11th.
So then that
No,
would-
no. Current year 10th and 11th, next year junior seniors.
Okay,
The group that's in the middle is the ninth grade.
Okay.
The current ninth graders. Yeah, current ninth graders. Even I got them. Make sure I'm saying the right number. All right. So here's, as mentioned, some districts, or most districts, as mentioned before, when they do a rezone, it's from scratch, and they do it, and it takes 4, 5, 6 months. As mentioned before, Superintendent O'Brien, we've been looking at this for 2 years, 2.5 years as a board. Maybe 2.5 years. And so we've had this we've looked at it from the mega concept, we've had all the data. So at the board level, this is not new. I mean, this is something we've been looking at for quite a while. And so I would say to you, I wouldn't really necessarily be alarmed that we're not going to do it in 4 to 6 months. We're going to do it in 1 to 2. Yeah. So what we'd like to do, we'll get you the copies. This has been a lot. Let's just regurgitate it. Talk to your neighbors, kind of get some ideas. Look at the lines. You can probably figure out what neighborhoods would go where and how it would affect the things. Look at the numbers. Any questions you have, write them down. We'll meet again. We will try to meet probably in, I'm thinking, early April. April 2nd is our board meeting?
April 2nd is our next board
Is our
meeting.
next board meeting. Typically, we'll have it like I'm thinking maybe the 1st, 3rd, or April 2, 3, 4, 5, April 5th or 12th. Probably the 5th. I don't think you want to meet next week, unless you want to meet next week. That's March, whatever, 28th. But I would like to meet at least once to 2 times more with the goal of the next time we meet, be able to really take the 3 options that they've given us, any tweaks that we want to have run, and she can do this with her laptop. I mean, this is something you want to move a neighbor, right? Okay, make sure I didn't make a promise you couldn't keep there. But this is something you want to look at something. She can move a boundary on the system, and automatically will repopulate and will tell you what the numbers are and how that will affect it.
It's not quite that seamless.
Okay.
Okay, one's good.
I can tell you, well, there are 20 kids that live there, or there are 150 kids that live there, and that's how it would affect you in your zone.
I'm a very oversimplification of the process person, okay? I'm definitely not the one you want implementing it. But so what we'll do, what I'd like to do is meet 1 to 2 times, 3rd time if necessary, but 1 to 2 times. Get the information, the feedback. They've given us 3 options. We'll tweak them. We'll narrow that down to 2 options that we all feel very comfortable with, that we can live with. Then once those 2 options we come up with, we will put that basically kind of on the district website, and community, A and B, you can vote. I mean, we're all going to feel comfortable with A or B, so let's just go ahead and let the community decide at the final step. Then if it's finalized, we'll come back. We probably need to do it. I think our May meeting is May 7th. We could call a special meeting at any time if we need to. And then we'll be able to let the community know, let the students know, and then the administration, that's when their work really begins. So they're going to already start it, but then they have to start, okay, who's going to go where, who's made what, transfer, and then that process will begin. So like I said, it's, we're looking at it from a 1 to 2 months, but a lot of us are looking at it as 2.5 years. And so I don't let that scare you that it's 1 to 2 months, because this really has been a process for a long time.
And we need to make sure that all the particulars about whether you gonna be bus, not bus, whatever it may be, that everybody knows this, so it's not like, oh, we just moving kids and
No,
that's it.
yeah. And I think the parameters we've set so far have been, equalize the numbers, low SES numbers to the best of your ability. We decided to go ahead and rezone current 10 and 11, the ninth grade group. Seems like we'll probably have some discussion at the next meeting. Transportation, we decided to do 1 year. We can revisit that the next time as well. And those are just those aren't really the boundaries. Those are just the implementation piece. And once we get that done, I feel that we will be able to do that, come up with some options and give it to the community, and it will be a product that outside of emotion, everybody will look at it and say, that's probably the best you could have done given the situation or the parameters that you had, and it makes sense. And maybe one person would have said they may have moved one little group over here, and everybody would have done things a little bit different. But for the most part, we'll meet the needs of the general population of our community. Is there anything? Again, I just want to thank you for coming. We do apologize. If we have closed session next time, we're going to have it after the workshop. Okay, I promise. I'll tell you that. Okay, if there is one. But I appreciate your time and effort. It's going to take a little bit more once you start looking at the maps. But it's just if questions come up, the next time we meet, that will be a Q&A, and then we'll take it from there. But I know you have a question. I'll get with you. I'm not going to extend. But again, I just want to reiterate. It's emotional, but try not to let that be the driver. But don't discount it 100% either. So you have to find that balance because there's a balance there. Mr. Capetillo, do you have a?
I was just saying, you mentioned a few things. It's like when you said we'll come down to let's say we want to come down to one or two options, then it'll go to the district website, and the community will have an opportunity to select vote. It's a straw poll at that point.
Yeah.
How much value is the school board going to put in the results of that? Is that something they're going to say, this is what the community wants, they want option A, and that's what we're going with, or is it going to be something that's just a consideration of other things?
My individual philosophy is if we develop two options here that we all feel good with, whoever wins the popular vote is it. And that's how I will vote. Okay.
So my concern would be you put option A,
and then we do B just because we want to do B. Yeah. No, I got you.
Because you want to do B. Yeah. Agreed.
If that's the point, well, my philosophy is if that's the point, why have it be?
That's your political campaign. Right. So, what he's saying is plain and simple.
Let me clarify.
Don't even put it out there to the community.
If we weren't going to,
you don't want to go with what they say.
Exactly. But my intent was if we have two options we feel good with, whatever the committee wants of those two, I'm good with.
Okay, that was my concern.
No, good clarifying. I appreciate it. Yes.
I will just say for the record, I agree with Mr. Benmal that with the idea that this is a compressed schedule, that you put at least this committee and the school board under, I think a concession would be that we should strongly consider some of the options, I guess, with transportation at night. I think that would be fair to the community.
Gotcha. That makes sense, and we'll have that to discuss. And the next, what is a good date? 29th, April 5th?
I already wrote down the 5th.
5th is not good.
Okay.
I'm okay.
If you can't make it, tell your board person if you have any questions, and they can bring that to that point too. But.
So a week from tonight, yes or no?
You guys want to do a week from tonight? I am.
Sooner the better.
That puts you.
Gives you more time if you need to meet again afterwards.
I'm fine with it.
Fine with it?
I can do either.
You can do either? 29th, next Thursday.
My only concern is that we start a little earlier than we did tonight.
I promise you we'll do that. If we have anything on special, it's going to be 10 minutes. I promise you. We're not going to.
I don't do it anymore. I'm in tennis.
Okay, yeah.
I have a tournament.
Next Thursday sound good for the majority? I mean, if someone you can't make it, let your board rep know, and if you have any questions.
So just to confirm, administrator, do we have everyone's electronic contact? Did you get an email invite today?
Nobody got it.
I'd like to get that if I could. If I could get
a bigger piece of paper
today, Garcia just asked you out. So if you don't mind leaving that.
On the district budget here? Yeah, guys, I'll pass this around if you want to put your email address on this, and we'll give it to administration. 6:30? ish traffic?
Want to get yours?
Do you want to do? Is 6:30 too hard to get here? I know traffic depending on where you work. Okay. 6:30. 6:30. Yeah, rub it in. All right.
Ms. Garcia will be back momentarily with copies of the map, so you can take it with you.
We have an email sheet going around.
And we need your email contact. Other than that, Ms. Fox will conclude the meeting.
We'll meet next Thursday at 6:30 p.m. Do you not hear me on that side of the room? No, we changed it to next year.
Okay, so what is that number, Jay?
29. Before 30.
4:30.
Before 30. Number 30. 29? No. 6:30, Thursday, March 29th, 2018, AD. Okay, we got it?
I just wanted, I think everybody feels this way, but I just wanted to say thanks to the board for giving us this opportunity to express our views so you guys can consider. We really do appreciate it.
And I want to return the favor. Thank you for taking time out of your evening to come here and to express your concerns and give your feedback. We appreciate it. Do we need to make a motion to adjourn, or is it a workshop, right? Yeah. So it's adjourned.